They whispered I was too fat for their son. Now I'm a CEO and nobody else matters. My name is Samantha, but everyone calls me Sammy. I'm 30 years old, and I spent most of my life believing I was destined to be alone. My mother died when I was just 8 years old, and my father, well, he never really processed that loss. He drowned himself in a bottle and never came back out. On the day my mother died, I felt like I became an orphan, even though I had a biologically living father. I lost my grandmother, grandfather, and my favorite aunt within an 18-month period. They were the last people who truly loved me, who made me feel like I had a place in the world. After them, I was left with just my alcoholic father and the loneliness that became my constant companion. At 15, I decided it would be better to live alone than to live in a house where emptiness was more tangible than the presence of any person. I grew up alone, learning to be independent, to work hard, to forge my own path. I studied, I worked, I pushed myself every day to prove to myself that I was worth something. I got a good job at a respectable company, a career I was proud of. I made friends, I built a beautiful life for myself, but there was always a void that no professional achievement could completely fill. It was the void of family. Then I met Marcus. He entered my life like a fresh breeze on a suffocating day. Intelligent, thoughtful, genuinely interested in who I was. It wasn't just physical attraction, though I was acutely aware of all the looks he gave me, the way his eyes traced my body with admiration. Marcus saw me and liked what he saw. All of me. Not the smaller version of me, not the version that fits into unrealistic beauty standards. He saw Sammy and found her beautiful. After a few months of dating, Marcus invited me to a family dinner. I was nervous. Extremely nervous. My heart raced as I drove to his parents' house. I didn't know how a real family worked, how to behave around them. My experience with family was practically non-existent. But when I arrived, I was greeted with warm smiles. His mother, Margaret, hugged me as if I were her daughter. His father, Robert, greeted me with a firm handshake and asked about my work. His twin siblings, Lisa and Thomas, seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. It was like a door to a completely new world had opened for me. Over time, I began to be invited regularly to these family dinners that happened a few times a month. It was a tradition of theirs, something they'd been doing for years. I started bringing cakes I baked at home, beers that Marcus liked, things that could contribute. Then I started bringing my best friend to some of these occasions. Marcus's best friend needed a job, and I recommended him to my company. I went to bat for him, put my professional reputation on the line, because Marcus asked me to. And because I loved my family. Or so I thought. I started babysitting Lisa's children when she needed to go out. I became the trusted nanny. I'd go to dinners and help clean up the kitchen. I took Margaret out to lunch when she was sad. It was as if I was finally building what I'd always wanted, a family that loved me, that accepted me. Marcus even started talking about marriage. He spoke about wanting to propose in the coming months, about asking his sisters to help him pick out the ring. I daydreamed about it. About marriage, about a lifetime by his side, about a family that would truly be mine. And then came that day. It was just another Tuesday. Marcus had gone to a family dinner, one of those Tuesday nights that had become routine in our lives. Normally I'd go with him, but that time I was working late. I left the office around 8:30 in the evening exhausted, but as I was driving, I realized I'd finished my commitment earlier than expected. Marcus had mentioned that the twins were having birthdays the following week. I'd spent the last 2 weeks painting pictures for them. They weren't just random drawings. I'd researched each one's hobbies, their personalities, and created custom artwork that reflected who they were. I'd spent hours, maybe dozens of hours on each one. My heart had been poured into those paintings. I decided it would be a surprise. I'd drive to Margaret and Robert's house and deliver the gifts in person. Marcus could help me carry everything from my van. It would be cool, a fun surprise. When I got there, I sent Marcus a text saying I was outside. He came to meet me, and we started carrying the gifts. We walked toward the house, toward the kitchen, when we heard the voices. My heart started beating strangely before I even understood the words. There was something in the tone that alerted me. Something wrong in the air. "I'm so glad she didn't come today," Lisa's voice rang out. "She completely ruins our family nights. She's so boring and annoying." My body froze. I could feel it freezing, as if someone had poured ice water through my veins. "Totally," Thomas replied. "She's so boring and horrible." "I agree," I heard Jennifer's voice. "She's terrible." I was in shock. Those names, those people, they were my people. Or I thought they were. Then Margaret spoke. Her voice, the voice that had always sounded warm to me, said something that made me feel like I'd been punched in the stomach. Sammy's nice and all, but I can't believe Marcus likes how fat she is. He could do so much better. Everything around me seemed to disappear. The words echoed in my ears as if they were coming from inside a tunnel. Fat. She'd said fat about me. And not in anger or during a fight, with casual disdain, as if it were just an obvious fact we should all recognize. He's dating down because he's still rewarding himself from that last girlfriend of his, Lisa added, and there was a poisonous quality to her voice that I'd never noticed before. He could definitely be with someone better. I wanted to vomit. My fingers were tingling. Marcus was beside me, but he seemed miles away. He was as white as a ghost. Well, Robert's voice sounded, and there was some defense there, but it was weak. You should be nice to Sammy. But no one really listened. They kept going, kept tearing down everything about me, exposing all the lack of genuineness behind those smiles, those hugs. I couldn't think straight. My body acted without my mind agreeing. I just went to the kitchen. I put the gifts, those paintings I'd made with love and care, on the counter. The impact was somewhat violent. I heard the wood hit the stone. "Happy birthday," I muttered, and my voice cracked. Tears were already streaming down my face. I turned and walked back to my van. I couldn't look at any of them. I couldn't deal with the apologetic eyes, the shocked expressions on their faces at being caught. I couldn't even process Marcus following me outside. I sat down in the driver's seat of my van, trembling. Marcus opened the passenger door and got in, and we both sat in silence for a while. There was only the sound of my muffled crying and the wind outside. "I'm sorry," he said eventually. "Sammy, I didn't know. I couldn't respond. How could I? The truth is that there was a part of me that had always known. There's an intuition that people develop when they grow up without a true family. An ability to feel when you don't really belong somewhere, when you're just pretending you belong until someone decides you're not worth the trouble." I spent the next week in a fog. Marcus wasn't doing anything different, but I was different. I'd regressed to that 15-year-old girl who decided it was safer to be alone than to risk rejection. "Are you going to talk to me about this?" Marcus asked a few days later. "Not now," I replied. "I'll talk to you when I get back from my trip." Because I had a trip planned, a week of work, then a week with friends I hadn't seen in months. Those friends who had never hurt me, who had never pretended to love me while whispering mean things behind my back. For the first time in months, I looked forward to that trip like I'd looked forward to nothing else. But Marcus, he was kind. He started doing things that showed me I was still everything to him. Small things. A longer hug. A kiss on my forehead before leaving for work. And when I came back from my trip, he'd planned a weekend at a ski resort for Thanksgiving. Just the two of us. It was during that weekend that we really talked about everything. "They don't know me," I said to Marcus, sitting in an armchair near the fireplace in our hotel room. "I thought they did. I thought they liked me." "They like you," Marcus insisted, but there was doubt in his voice. "No, they don't. They think I'm fat. That you could do better." And my voice broke. I really loved them. I thought I'd finally found my family. Marcus sat beside me and took my hand. "You have a family. You have me. And I'm going to choose you. Every single time, Sammy. You will always be my choice." And he kept that promise. When we returned from Thanksgiving, there was a strange tension hanging over everything. Marcus spoke to his mother, making it clear we wouldn't be attending the family's Thanksgiving dinner. Margaret apparently didn't take it seriously until the day before, when she called asking if I was bringing pie. When Marcus reminded her we wouldn't be there, she had an emotional breakdown on the phone. "She wants to apologize," Marcus said after hanging up. "Of course she does," I replied, but without bitterness. Just exhaustion. But Marcus insisted that maybe we should give her a chance. And honestly, despite everything that had happened, there was still a part of me that desperately wanted this to all just be a giant misunderstanding. That we could go back to those warm dinners where I pretended not to notice I didn't belong. So, a few days after Thanksgiving, we arranged for Margaret and Robert to come to dinner at our house. I was absolutely nervous. I spent the afternoon cleaning, cooking, trying to keep my heart calm. Marcus noticed my anxiety and tried to reassure me, but we both knew this could go either way. It could be great. It would probably be awkward at least. When they arrived, there was palpable guilt around them. Robert started with a genuine apology. He looked me in the eyes and said he was extremely ashamed, that he should never have said those things, or rather, should never have allowed those things to be said without protesting much more. "You were so kind to us," he said. "And I didn't deserve your kindness at that moment, but you were kind anyway." I accepted his apology. Robert had always seemed to be the most rational person in the family anyway. Margaret was different. She cried as she tried to apologize, and I couldn't tell if she was truly sorry or just sorry she'd been caught. There was something in her eyes that didn't completely convince me. But I was trying to be generous. Marcus was looking at me with such clear hope that I decided maybe I could find a way to move forward. A few days later, Margaret called me. She asked if I could meet her for lunch. Just the two of us. I was afraid, but I agreed. We sat in a small, cozy restaurant, and Margaret started talking. And as she talked, I began to understand. Not empty apologies. A real admission. When you and Marcus started dating, Margaret said, toying with her fork without really eating, I thought you came from a different world than ours. Better world, maybe. You had this education I never had. You had this independence. This way of moving through the world that, well, it scared me. I blinked at her, waiting for her to continue. My life has always been surrounded by family, she went on. I grew up in a big, noisy house. I have sisters, cousins, uncles. There's always someone. And I thought that was how everyone lived. When you started coming to the dinners, I realized you didn't have anyone but us. And instead of making me feel grateful that I could help give you a family, it made me feel jealous. She looked at me, and her eyes were wet. You accomplished things on your own that it took my whole life of family help to accomplish. And you were beautiful and intelligent and everything my son wanted. And instead of being happy for him, I started to resent you. To find things wrong with you to make me feel better about my own insecurities. The conversation continued for hours. I opened my heart and told Margaret about my childhood. About losing my mother, about my father, about the years I spent alone. About how every rejection seemed to confirm a truth I'd always suspected, that I wasn't enough, that something in me was fundamentally wrong. And Margaret listened. Really listened. She cried when I talked about my grandmother, my grandfather, my aunt. She cried when I talked about being alone at 15. She took my hand across the table and said she was sorry. Not for being discovered, but because I'd been through that. You deserved better, she said. And now you deserve us to be better. I let Margaret in a little. Not completely, you don't rebuild trust overnight, but enough to see if she was genuinely trying to change. My younger sister-in-law, Jennifer, called me a few days later. She apologized over the phone. Sammy, she said, was uncomfortable, but she acknowledged that she'd been wrong. I asked if she was really sorry or just sorry she'd been caught, and she didn't answer immediately. I think that was answer enough. But she tried, and I appreciated the effort, even if it was imperfectly motivated. Thomas was more cautious. When Marcus was at work and reached out to me via LinkedIn, sensing the atmosphere was still tense, he proposed meeting. He came to my office, a move that made him clearly uncomfortable, and offered me an apology. He said it had been wrong, that it was cowardly to suggest his brother could do better, and that he understood now that he had misjudged. I was afraid you'd ruin his marriage, he admitted oddly, as if you were some kind of threat. But I see now that you're exactly what he needs. I accepted his apology but kept my distance. He'd made peace because of workplace discomfort, not from genuine change of perspective. And I was okay with that. Not everyone needs to be sincere. Sometimes polite cordiality is enough. But Lisa was different. Lisa didn't apologize. She didn't call. She didn't show up at my door with flowers and fake tears. She simply disappeared from our lives. Until Margaret casually mentioned that Lisa was angry that I wouldn't be her babysitter anymore. Angry that I had ruined things. Angry that, somehow, I was the villain in this story. She said you're causing trouble, Margaret told me during one of our conversations. She thinks you're turning me against her. You're turned against her because she refuses to acknowledge she was wrong, I replied lightly. This isn't about me. It's about her not wanting to accept responsibility for her behavior. Margaret conceded the point, but there was sadness in her eyes. I realized there were still family ties there, bonds of blood I couldn't completely understand. They were still her family, despite everything. And then there was Marcus. Marcus, who chose me every day. Who refused to fully reconcile with Lisa until she genuinely apologized to me. Who planned that we'd have Christmas away from them, rather than put ourselves in a situation where we had to coexist with someone who still hated us. Who had started talking to a jeweler about a custom engagement ring. One night, about a month after my lunch with Margaret, Marcus was beside me in bed when his phone lit up. He picked it up, and I thought it was just a random notification. But then he started whispering something about the ring photo while getting out of bed, trying not to fully wake me. Of course I woke up completely. I pretended to be asleep, but my heart raced. Ring. Was he really going through with the proposal? A few days later, we got an invitation from Sarah, Marcus's best friend's wife, for a shopping and spa weekend. She knew a really great local jewelry store where we could explore options. I didn't completely understand her enthusiasm about it, but I agreed. When Marcus left the room, Sarah sent me a message on Marcus's phone, which he'd left on the table. The message had a photo of a stone, a beautiful diamond that shone even through the phone screen. I looked at the photo. Then I looked at Marcus, who was watching my reaction. Then I looked at the photo again. Marcus, my voice came out as a whisper. Are you? Not exactly how I planned, he admitted, laughing a little nervously. Sarah was way more enthusiastic than I expected, and I accidentally sent the photo. But, Sammy, I want to spend my life with you. I want to make it official. I want you to be my wife. I went straight to him and kissed him, and yes, it was a complete emotional disaster. I cried on his shoulder while he laughed and asked if that was a yes. It's a yes, I managed to say between sobs. 1,000 times yes. I didn't tell anyone for days. I just picked up my phone and looked at the ring photo. I let Marcus hold me. I daydreamed about a future life I thought would never be possible. When we finally told the family, it wasn't with great fanfare. Marcus called Robert to tell him, and Robert cried on the phone, the right kind of tears this time, I noticed. Margaret came to dinner and hugged me so tightly I couldn't breathe. Even Jennifer sent a congratulations message. But Lisa didn't respond. And when Margaret mentioned the proposal to her, Lisa apparently said she still thought it was a terrible choice. Then she can spend Christmas alone, Marcus said without hesitation, when his mother suggested she should stay home if Marcus and I were going to family dinners. I'm not going to ask Sammy to sit at a table with someone who still hates her. And you need to understand, Mom. If you keep trying to force me to choose, you're going to be alone too. It was the first time I heard him make so clear where his loyalty lay. Not with his mother or his blood relatives. With me. And even though the idea of removing myself from the whole family dynamic scared me, there was a part of me that felt seen, valued, chosen. Marcus and I spent Christmas at his best friend's house. We knew the people there. We were genuinely welcome. And it was perfect, actually. Simple and warm and genuine. When I returned to work in January, there was a new energy in me. A lightness I hadn't felt in months. I was an engaged woman now. I had a life ahead of me. Yes, there was a scar where the trust in Margaret and her children had been, but there was also healing happening. And Marcus, my Marcus, had given me the one thing I'd always wanted, a family that chose me, repeatedly, despite everything. The months that followed were strange in their normalcy. Life continued, but everything had fundamentally changed. I was engaged. That word still seemed unreal when I said it in my head. Marcus and I started having conversations about the wedding. He wanted something at the beach, something intimate. I wanted a destination, away from the city, away from critical eyes, away from anywhere there might be family drama. When I mentioned a destination ceremony the following summer, Marcus agreed immediately. You and me, he said. And the people who really love us. That's what matters. The thing is, despite all my anger and disappointment, I still wanted my family, Marcus's family, to be there. That frustrated me with myself. Why did I still care? Why was there still this childish need for approval? But there was also progress being made. Margaret started appearing in my life in ways that seemed genuine. She'd call me to lunch, not to apologize again, but just to talk. She'd ask about my day, my work, my thoughts. She'd listen. One day in February, she called me for coffee. When I arrived at the small cafe near my office, Margaret was already there, holding 2 cups of coffee and with a nervous expression on her face. I wanted to talk to you about something, she said as soon as I sat down. And I don't want you to feel pressured to answer right now. I winced internally. Nothing good ever came after that opening. I'm thinking about going to therapy, Margaret continued. About my jealousy, about why I reacted so badly to you, about all these things I discovered about myself when you and Marcus started dating. And, well, I'd like you to consider coming with me to a few sessions. With the therapist. Joint sessions or something like that. My first instinct was to refuse. I wasn't ready to expose my heart like that, especially not with someone who'd hurt me so deeply. But Margaret continued before I could speak. I understand if you don't want to, she said quickly. But I really want to fix this. Not just for Marcus, not just because I got caught. Because you deserve a mother, Sammy. And I'd like to try to be that for you, if you'll give me a chance. There were tears in her eyes again, but this time they didn't seem false. They seemed rooted in genuine pain, genuine remorse. After thinking about it for a week, I agreed to try one session. The therapist was a woman named Dr. Chen, someone middle-aged with a calm presence that made me immediately less defensive. We sat in her office. Marcus had offered to come with me too, but I insisted it should just be between Margaret and me. He waited in the waiting room with a book, ready to hold me afterward if I needed it. Dr. Chen started by asking questions. Not confrontational, just curious. She wanted to understand the dynamic, the history, what had happened. When I got to the part about what I was called in the kitchen, Margaret started crying. Not the controlled crying from before, but real tears that seemed to come from somewhere deep. I was a bitch, Margaret said, and it was the first time I'd heard her curse. I was a jealous, cruel bitch, and I hurt someone who had done nothing but love me. Why do you think you did that? Dr. Chin asked gently. Margaret took a while to answer. Because she had something I felt I never had. She was alone most of her life and yet managed to be complete. She managed to be educated. She managed to be successful. She managed to be beautiful and elegant and independent. And I had all the advantages, a loving family, support, opportunities, and yet I feel like I didn't accomplish any of that on my own. Like I just followed the path that was laid out for me. I looked at Margaret with new eyes. She had really thought about this. And when Marcus chose her, Margaret continued, I took it as a personal rejection. Like he was saying that what I had to offer, my family, my security, my support, wasn't enough. That he wanted something different. Something better. And that hurt you, Dr. Chin said. It hurt a lot, Margaret admitted. We had several of these meetings. Slowly, the layers began to unravel. I told Margaret about my childhood, about how I was raised, about how every rejection seemed to confirm that I didn't belong anywhere. I told her what it was like to be abandoned by your own father, what it was like to lose your mother so young. And Margaret listened. She asked me hard questions. She didn't try to minimize my suffering or offer me simple solutions. She just listened. After about 4 sessions, Dr. Chin suggested that maybe Marcus should join us in one. Not because there's a problem with you two, she clarified, but because there's a story he also needs to process. About being put in a position where he had to choose, about what that meant for him. So one night in March, the 3 of us sat in that office. Marcus talked about how he felt when he heard what his family had said about me. How devastating it was to discover that people he'd loved his whole life were capable of such cruelty. How it was to know that he would have to choose, that he couldn't just make everyone happy. I choose Sammy, he said, and his voice was firm. Always. But it hurts that it has to be a choice. It hurts that my family put me in that position. Would you like them to understand her better? Dr. Chen asked. I'd like them to love her, Marcus replied. Really love her. Not just tolerate her. But if they can't, I understand. Sammy is my future, and I can't let my past destroy my future. Margaret cried throughout the entire session. But this time, I was beginning to believe they were tears of redemption, not self-pity. After these sessions, something changed. Margaret was kind, but not excessively so. She included me in things, but naturally. She'd ask about my day and really listen to the answer. And when I mentioned something that bothered me, she didn't try to minimize or fix it, she just validated it. We began having regular lunches. We started getting to know each other in ways that aren't possible during loud family dinners. I learned about Margaret, her dreams, her fears, her insecurities. And she learned about me. One day in April, she asked me if I'd like her and Robert to help me plan the wedding. No pressure, she added quickly. If you want to do it alone, I understand. But if you want our help, well, we'd like to be involved. I thought about it. The idea of letting my future husband's mother be involved in my wedding would have seemed impossible a few months ago. But now it seemed right. Yes, I replied. I'd like your help. Margaret smiled, and this time the smile was genuine. The planning began. Margaret had ideas, but she'd ask before sharing them. She respected my preferences. When I suggested a sunset ceremony on a beach in Aruba, she and Robert didn't hesitate. It will be perfect, Margaret said. You'll be a beautiful bride. And I believed her. But not everything was perfect. Lisa remained a problem. She didn't show up at events, didn't call, didn't message. And when her name was mentioned, there was a tension that crossed the room. Robert finally had a conversation with Lisa, the famous, disappointed parent speech that Marcus had mentioned. Apparently, it didn't work. Lisa went to their house, defended her position that I was still the intruder who destroyed the family, and basically refused to reconcile. She's your daughter and you love her, Marcus had said to his father. But if she can't be civil to me and Sammy, she can't be around us. End of story. Robert had been devastated, but he didn't disagree. He'd set a boundary. Jennifer and Thomas attended occasional family events, maintained a cordial relationship with me. It wasn't deep friendship, but it was respectful. And honestly, it was all I could ask for. As May approached, I found myself thinking less about Lisa and more about my future. I was engaged. In a few months, I'd be a wife. The idea was still surreal. One night, about 2 weeks before the wedding, Marcus came home with a package. Inside was a photo album, one he'd assembled over the last few months. There were photos of us in our early dates. Photos from Thanksgiving. Photos of me talking with Robert, with Margaret, with Jennifer. There was even a photo of me in Dr. Chen's office, laughing at something that had been said. "I wanted you to know," Marcus said as we flipped through the pages together, "that despite everything that happened, despite the pain and confusion, you changed my life. You made me grow. You made me better." I cried as I looked at the photos. "And you're about to become my wife," he continued. "And that's the most incredible thing that could have happened in my life." That night, I fell asleep with my head on his chest, and for the first time since that terrible day in the kitchen, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. The 2 weeks before the wedding passed in a blur of activities and emotions. Margaret called me for a bachelorette weekend, and I was nervous about what that might mean. But when the day came, it was simple and perfect. Just me, some of my longtime friends, and a house rented near the beach. Margaret made a genuine effort to integrate with my friends. She asked about our friendships, about how we met, about the important moments we'd shared. And when I told stories about my life before Marcus, about the years of loneliness, she listened with genuine attention, without trying to fix or minimize. "You're so strong," Margaret said one night while we were all sitting around a bonfire. "I wouldn't have been able to do everything you did alone." "You would have," I replied. "People are stronger than they think when they don't have a choice." Margaret took my hand and squeezed it. There were tears in her eyes again, but this time I knew they were tears of acceptance, of recognition, of genuine change. "I'm so grateful you're going to be part of my life," Margaret said. "Not just as my son's wife, but as part of me. As my daughter." My heart felt full. The night before the wedding, I couldn't sleep. Marcus had insisted on following the tradition of not seeing each other, so he was at his best friend's house. I was at a luxury hotel with Margaret, Robert, Jennifer, and some cousins I'd met in recent months. I spent most of the night looking at my wedding dress hanging on the wall of my room. It was simple and elegant, with delicate lace and a long train that dragged behind me like a cloud. I looked at myself in the mirror and could barely recognize the girl looking back. At 15, I decided I'd never have a traditional family, that I'd never have a fairy tale wedding, that my destiny was to be alone, because being alone was safer. It was easier. And then Marcus came along, who believed in me before I believed in myself, who turned his life upside down to make sure I knew my worth. There was a knock on my room door in the middle of the night. "Sammy? Are you awake?" It was Margaret's voice. I opened the door to find her in pajamas, holding 2 cups of hot tea. "I thought you might be having a panic attack," she said with a small smile. "Everyone does the night before the wedding." I let her in, and we sat on the balcony of my room, looking at the ocean glowing under moonlight. For a while, we just sipped our tea in silence. "Are you afraid?" Margaret asked eventually. "Not of marrying Marcus," I replied. "I'm absolutely sure about that. But I'm afraid something will ruin it. That I'll wake up and this will all just be a beautiful dream I had." Margaret set down her tea and took my hand. "I understand that fear," she said. "I understand because you grew up without security, without someone you could completely trust. But Sammy, what you and Marcus have is real. And I promise you, I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving that my family can be trusted too, that you belong." "What if you give up?" I asked, and my voice came out small. "What if in a few months you go back to being jealous? What if it all falls apart again?" "Then I go back to therapy," Margaret said matter-of-factly. "Then I sit with Dr. Chen again and work through those feelings. Because, Sammy, I learned something important these past months. Life is too short to waste on resentment and jealousy, and I love my son too much to risk losing him. And I've come to love you enough to want to be in your life, genuinely be there, not just pretend." She took a deep breath. "You're going to be the best thing that's ever happened to this family," Margaret continued. "Because you're going to teach us about strength, about resilience, about unconditional love. And we're going to be better because of it." I cried on that balcony with my hot tea and my future husband's mother holding my hand, and I thought about everything I'd been through. I thought about my mother, who died when I was just a child. I thought about my father, who was never there for me. I thought about all those years of loneliness and uncertainty. And then I thought about Marcus, about Margaret, about Robert. about how my future was unfolding in front of me like a flower that had finally received enough sunlight to bloom. "Thank you," I whispered to Margaret. "For trying. For being here." "Always," she replied, and I believed her. The morning of the wedding arrived with a golden glow streaming through the hotel windows. Margaret and I got ready together, and it was one of the most intimate moments we'd ever shared. She did my hair, helped with my dress, adjusted my veil. "You look absolutely beautiful," she said, and there was so much emotion in her voice that I began to cry. "Be careful," she laughed, pointing at my makeup. "You'll ruin everything." Robert found us shortly before the ceremony. When he saw me, his eyes filled with tears. "You're beautiful," he said. "And my son is the luckiest man in the world. Will you walk me down the aisle?" I asked. He blinked, clearly emotional. "It would be an honor." As we walked down, I saw Marcus waiting at the altar, under an arch of white and yellow flowers. There was an ocean breeze, and the light was perfect. There were our closest friends, the people who really mattered. And there was Marcus. When our eyes met, I felt like the world stopped. Everything that had happened, all the pain and confusion, led to this moment. To this man who had chosen me, repeatedly, despite everything. When I reached the altar, Robert handed me to Marcus and whispered something in his ear that made Marcus smile through his tears. The ceremony was simple. We'd both written our own vows. Marcus spoke about meeting me and knowing immediately that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with me. About how I'd taught him about strength and resilience. About how he promises to stand by my side always, choose me every day, and create the loving family I always deserved. When it was my turn, my voice trembled. "You saw me before you knew me," I began. "You saw the girl who'd spent most of her life believing she didn't deserve love, and you insisted on proving she was wrong. You loved me when I was broken. You chose me when it was the hardest thing to do. You gave me a family, not just biologically, but because you refused to let it be impossible." I paused to breathe, trying not to cry. "I promised to spend my life honoring that choice. That I'll love you the way you loved me, completely, without reservation, unconditionally. That we'll build a life together that will be better than anything we can imagine now. And that you'll never have to regret standing in my corner." When we kissed as husband and wife, the whole group applauded. And looking at the faces in the crowd, Margaret with tears streaming down her face, Robert with a wide smile, Jennifer and Thomas applauding, I realized I had truly found where I belonged. That family isn't just who you're born to. It's who chooses to stand by your side. It's who's willing to work through the difficult to get to the good. It's who sees you completely and loves you anyway. The reception was joyful. We danced, laughed, ate. Margaret and I danced together, and she whispered in my ear, "Welcome to the family, Sammy." And this time I really believed it. Late in the evening, Marcus and I escaped to a private balcony, away from the noise of the party. He pulled me close, and we just stood there, looking at the ocean under the stars. "You're my wife now," Marcus said, as if he was still processing it. "I am," I confirmed. "And you're my husband." "I love you," he said. "I love you too," I replied. More than I thought it was possible to love someone. He kissed me under the stars, and for the first time in my life, there was no fear, no uncertainty. There was only the absolute certainty that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Later, as we lay in bed in our honeymoon suite, Marcus told me that his father had finally refused to talk to Lisa about her absence from the wedding. He said she chose her pride over family, Marcus said, and that she'll have to live with the consequences of that. "Does that hurt him?" I asked. "Yes," Marcus answered honestly. "He wishes she'd come. But he chose you. He chose to support the decision I made. And I respect that very much." I fell asleep on Marcus's chest, his hand holding mine, and for the first time since that terrible day in the kitchen, I felt complete peace. The first few months of marriage were a happy blur of adjusting to a new life. Marcus and I went back home, and although technically we'd already been living together, there was something different about returning as husband and wife. Everything seemed more real, more permanent. Margaret started sending me regular messages, not just to check in, but sharing things about her day, asking my opinion on decisions, including me in her life in a way that made me feel like I truly belonged. Robert sometimes showed up at my office for surprise lunches, bringing sandwiches and chatting about work, about life. There was an ease in our relationship that hadn't existed before. Jennifer also continued to be present, though we still maintained a certain distance. She invited me shopping a few times, and I accepted. We weren't intimate friends, but there was mutual respect. She'd finally understood that her apologies needed to be more than empty words. Thomas, for his part, had become almost friendly. He and Marcus started going out regularly again, and I could hear their conversations becoming more genuine each week. But Lisa remained absent. There was a deafening silence around Lisa. No one voluntarily mentioned her name. When someone did, usually Robert in private conversations with Margaret, there was sadness that hung in the air. She'd lost her place in the family through her own stubbornness, and everyone felt the weight of it. One night in July, about 2 months after the wedding, I received a message from an unknown number. My heart raced when I opened it. "Hi, Sammy. It's Jennifer. Wanted to talk to you about something regarding Lisa before you hear it from someone else. Would you have time for coffee tomorrow?" My instincts told me to run, that I wasn't ready for any drama involving Lisa, but there was a part of me that wanted to understand. That wanted to know if there was even a small chance at reconciliation. I agreed. When we met at a small cafe near my office, Jennifer seemed nervous. She toyed with her coffee cup while gathering courage to speak. "Lisa lost her shared custody of her children for a while," Jennifer said eventually. "My father testified in court about how she was emotionally absent, how she was neglecting the kids while being bitter about her life. And the court agreed with him." I winced. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, just a heavy sadness. "She's in therapy now," Jennifer continued. "Not by choice, but because it was required for her to regain custody. And apparently, in her sessions, she's finally begun to process why she said those things about you. Why she felt so threatened by you. Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because Lisa wants to apologize," Jennifer said. "She asked me to check if you'd be willing to listen." I felt my stomach tighten. I didn't know how to feel about this. The part of me that had been hurt by Lisa wanted to refuse, wanted to keep that anger as a shield against further hurt. But there was also the part of me that understood suffering, because I'd lived with it my whole life. "Tell her I'll think about it," I replied to Jennifer. That night, I talked to Marcus about it while we were cooking dinner together. "How do you feel?" he asked, cutting ingredients while I stirred a pot. "I'm not sure," I admitted. Part of me wants to just accept the apology and move on. But another part is still angry. Still hurt. "Both can be true," Marcus said. "You can be angry and still be willing to listen." "What if she's not genuine?" I asked. "What if it's just another attempt to make you feel guilty?" "Then you'll know," Marcus replied. "You listen, you evaluate, and then you decide what to do with the information. No one said you have to forgive her right away, or even forgive her at all." I spent a week thinking about it. I spent time in therapy with Dr. Chen. Yes, I had continued going to individual sessions, discussing what it would mean to meet Lisa again. "What do you think you need to hear?" Dr. Chen asked. "I need to hear that she understands I didn't deserve what was said," I replied. "That she recognizes it was jealousy and insecurity, not anything I did wrong. That she recognizes I shouldn't be held responsible for her problems." "And if you hear these things?" Dr. Chen asked. "How would you feel?" "I'm not sure," I admitted. "Maybe relieved. Maybe still hurt. Maybe both." "It's okay if it's both," Dr. Chen assured me. So one Thursday in August, I arranged to meet Lisa in a park. Marcus offered to come with me, but I refused. This needed to be between Lisa and me. When I saw her sitting on a bench, waiting, she seemed small. Smaller than I remembered. There were lines of exhaustion on her face, and she was visibly nervous. I sat down at a respectful distance from her, not immediately beside her. "Thank you for coming," Lisa said, her voice trembling slightly. "You asked me to," I replied. There was no warmth in my voice, but there was no cruelty either. Just honesty. "I know I don't have the right to ask for forgiveness," Lisa began. "I know I was terrible. I was jealous and cruel and completely unfair to you. And you owe me nothing, not even your time in this moment." I paused, letting her continue. "When you started dating my brother, I didn't see you as his girlfriend," Lisa continued. "I saw you as a threat. Because you had everything I felt I'd never have: independence, education, professional success. And instead of inspiring me, instead of making me want to be better, I created stories about you. Stories about how you didn't deserve my brother, how you were taking him from me." She took a deep breath. "My therapist pointed out that I was projecting my own insecurity onto you. That I had unresolved issues with my own worth as a person, and I was channeling that into you because you were an easy target. Someone who couldn't defend herself because she wanted so badly to belong." My heart tightened at that last bit. I realized in therapy that what I did, what I said about you, was one of the cruelest things I've ever done, Lisa continued, and there were tears streaming down her face now. "Because you didn't deserve any of it. You were just a kind person trying to be part of a family. And I found a reason to hate you." She looked me in the eyes, and for the first time, I saw genuine remorse there. Not the regret of being caught, but the remorse of someone who truly understood the damage she'd caused. I lost my kids, Lisa said, for a while, because my bitterness and anger affected them. They saw their mother being a horrible person, and they pulled away from me. And it was exactly what I deserved. Lisa, I began, but she raised her hand. Let me finish, please, she asked. I just wanted to say that you're an incredible person. You're generous and kind, and you love my brother in a way I've never seen anyone love someone before. And you deserve better than what you got from me. You deserve to be welcomed without reservations. And I'm so sorry. I sat in silence for a moment. There was so much I wanted to say, about the pain I'd felt, about how that comment had confirmed all my worst fears about myself, about how it had been to know I wasn't really welcome anywhere. But there was also understanding. Because I understood what it was like to be hurt and to hurt others, to project that pain onto someone else. Because I'd spent my whole life doing exactly that, finding reasons not to trust, not to believe I could be loved. You hurt me, I said eventually. Very much. That comment, not just about my body, but about your whole attitude toward me, confirmed everything bad I'd ever felt about myself. Lisa cried harder. But you were also suffering, I continued. You were angry at yourself and channeling it into me. And you recognize that now. You're doing the work to change. I paused. I won't say everything's okay. Because it's not, I continued. It's going to take time for me to be comfortable around you. It's going to take time for me to trust that you won't turn on me again. But I'm willing to try. For Marcus. For your mother. For those kids of yours who deserve to have a whole mother. Thank you, Lisa whispered. Thank you for just listening. We didn't hug when we parted ways. But Lisa thanked me again, and I nodded. There were just the beginning steps of a possible path to forgiveness. When I told Marcus about the meeting, he pulled me into a tight hug. You're extraordinary. He whispered into my hair. You know that. I'm just trying to be the person you always believed I was, I replied. You always were that person, Marcus said. You just needed to believe in yourself. In the months that followed, things began to change. Lisa started appearing at family events again, at first uncomfortably, but gradually with more ease. She was kind to me, and I was cordial with her. We weren't friends, but we were working to build mutual respect. Margaret called me out for lunch one day in September and announced that she had a surprise. I enrolled you in a program for women entrepreneurs, she said. No pressure, but I thought you might be interested. Given everything you've accomplished, I think you'd be a wonderful mentor. My eyes filled with tears. Margaret was offering me opportunities, was seeing me as someone with value to offer beyond just being her son's wife. I'd love to, I replied. And so it continued. Life unfolded in its own particular way of imperfect perfection. There were difficult moments. I found out that it would be complicated for Marcus and me to have biological children, which shook us. But there were also moments of pure joy. One day in November, almost exactly a year since the kitchen incident, Marcus brought me flowers and a box of chocolate. What's this? I asked, laughing. It's the anniversary of the worst and best day of our lives, he replied. The worst because you found out my family was fake. The best because it made us stronger. Because it proved how much we love each other. He kissed me, and I remembered that 15-year-old girl who decided it was safer to be alone. That girl would never have believed this was possible. That she'd have a family that loved her. That she'd be chosen every day. I love you, I whispered against his lips. I love you too, he replied. Always. And for the first time in my life, I believed that always was really possible. 2 years after the wedding, Marcus and I received unexpected news. The company where I worked was promoting me to CEO. It was a position I'd dreamed of getting, a validation of everything I'd fought for on my own. Margaret and Robert were the first to know. Margaret cried with joy, and Robert hugged me like I was his biological daughter. I always knew you were extraordinary, he said. When I posted the news on social media, I received a message from a number I didn't recognize. It was Lisa. Saw your promotion. Congratulations. You deserve it. 3 simple words. But there was something genuine in them. Lisa had continued in therapy, and she had slowly rebuilt her life. She'd fully regained custody of her children. She'd become a better version of herself. Not through my validation, but through her own work. That was the real revenge, I realized. Not making Lisa suffer. It was thriving despite her. It was living the life I deserved and letting other people witness it. A month later, during a family dinner, Margaret announced that she and Robert were finally taking that trip to Europe they'd always dreamed about. They asked me to look after the house while they were gone. You're part of this family, Margaret said, taking my hand. You always will be. That night, after everyone had left, I stood on the balcony of Marcus's house, looking at the stars. I thought about my mother, my grandfather, my grandmother, my aunt. I thought about that lonely 15-year-old girl who decided the world was too cruel to believe in it. And I thought about how one man had entered my life and refused to let me believe those lies about myself. Marcus found me there a few minutes later, wrapping a jacket around me. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I'm perfect," I replied, and this time it was true. "I'm home." He kissed me, and I knew I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not just in a place, but with a person. In a life I had built with my own hands, with the help of those who truly loved me. The pain of being rejected by Marcus's family had transformed into strength. It had taught me that I was worthy of being chosen, that I deserved better than falsehood. That true love doesn't whisper cruelties. It stands firm in the face of adversity. And as I looked at Marcus, at that man who chose to stand by me when it was the hardest thing to do, I felt a peace I had pursued my entire life. I had finally found my family. Not the family I was born into. Not the one imposed on me by blood. But the family that chose me. The family that loved me genuinely. The family that was willing to do the hard work to fix what had been broken. And that, I realized, was the best revenge of all.